My name is Adele Hawthorne. I am 62 years old, a retired librarian, and for most of my life, I believed I understood the rhythm of quiet mornings. I thought I knew how safety felt, how trust sounded, how a home breathed. I also believed my son could never hurt me in ways that counted. I was wrong, and the night I learned that truth began with something so small it should have blown away like dust. Instead, it opened the ground beneath my feet. If you are listening, stay with me. And if stories like this help you see the world a little clearer, feel free to follow this channel so we can walk through these moments together. I remember the faint rattle of my old chandelier as I brewed my morning tea. That gentle chime had always reminded me of my late husband, Henry. He used to say, "A house speaks in little sounds, and the quiet ones are always honest." I moved slowly, touching the rim of the mug the way I always did when I needed steadiness. There was no warning, no disturbance, just the soft clink of porcelain and the morning light brushing over framed pictures of Henry and our son Nolan. The world still looked ordinary then. I had planned to visit an old friend that morning, or at least that is what I told Nolan when I left the house. I smiled, locked the door, and told myself the drive would clear my head. But halfway down the street, something tugged at me, a feeling I could not name. Something cold sliding beneath the ribs. I pulled over, turned off the engine, and let the air settle around me. A strange thought came, sharp and unwelcome. Go back, just look. Something is wrong. I listened to it. I parked half a block away and walked quietly toward my own driveway. Each step felt heavier. The morning should have smelled like wet grass and warm asphalt, but instead it carried a weight that tightened my chest. My shoes barely touched the ground as I moved around the hedges toward the side of the house. That was when I heard it. Nolan's voice, low, edged with something I had not heard from him since he was a teenager trying to hide trouble. Then came Sierra's voice, smooth and practiced, like she was reading lines she had rehearsed. I froze near the garage door, holding my breath without meaning to. Their words slipped through the small crack beneath the frame, and I should have walked away, or coughed, or made a sound to warn them I was there. But something inside me insisted on stillness. I leaned in without letting my shadow cross the light. That was when I heard my son laugh. An unfamiliar laugh, the kind of laugh a person has when they believe no one who matters is listening. He said the sentence that hollowed me out in one blow, each word sinking like a stone in water. Can't wait to see Mom's face when she realizes she's got nothing. I felt the world tilt beneath me. The garage seemed to pulse around us. For a heartbeat, I could not breathe. Sierra answered him with a satisfied hum, the kind that belongs to someone who has already counted money that is not theirs. And then my son said something even worse, something I will never forget. No matter how many years I live, he said, I just moved the last of her savings into your account. It's safer there. He sounded proud, amused, like he had solved a puzzle. My hand shook against the wall. My throat closed. I tasted metal. The warmth of the morning evaporated, replaced by a chill that crawled up my spine. I pressed my palm harder against the siding of the house, as if that would keep me upright. Sierra murmured something about needing to do it before I got back. She told him to hurry. She told him not to worry. She told him I trusted him too much to see anything coming. I should have cried. I should have stumbled backward. Instead, something inside me snapped into perfect focus. I felt an old part of myself return. The part I had buried with Henry. The part that remembered how to stand still in a storm. My son stepped deeper into the garage, his shoes scraping against concrete as he adjusted something heavy. I could hear faint clinks of cash boxes, paper sliding, the rustle of envelopes. My heart pounded in slow, painful beats. Then I heard him smile. I could hear it even without seeing his face. He said, "This is going to be easier than I thought." A sound left me then, too soft for them to hear. A breath mixed with disbelief and something darker. I straightened, just slightly, enough to see his silhouette through the garage window. He was leaning over a laptop, Sierra standing close beside him. They looked like partners, not spouses. They looked aligned in a way that made my skin prickle. I stepped back into the shadow of the hedge, hand pressed against my chest. I heard Sierra close the laptop with a sharp click. Nolan told her he needed to grab the cabin documents next. She told him to hurry before I returned. I realized in that moment that if I walked into that garage, I would lose everything: my money, my son, and any chance of understanding how deep this betrayal ran. I forced myself to stay silent, to stay unseen, to wait like the darkness itself. When they left the garage, laughing about something I did not catch, I slipped away as quietly as I had arrived. My legs felt foreign, as if they did not belong to me. My breath came in tight, measured pulls. My life had tilted off its axis, and yet everything looked the same. The sunlit sidewalk, the neighbors' wind chimes, the faint scent of pine. But I was no longer the woman who had left the house that morning. When I reached my car, I sat in the driver's seat without turning the key. My hands rested on the steering wheel, steady in a way that surprised me. The betrayal should have broken me. Instead, it sharpened me, and I whispered the only words that matched the moment. I didn't come to visit after all. I looked back at my home, the place where I had poured decades of love and safety and trust. Something inside me tightened, then hardened, then lifted its head for the first time in years. If my son believed I would stand still while he stripped my life bare, he had forgotten who raised him. This was the moment I chose not to fall apart. This was the moment everything started. I turned the key, exhaled slowly, and drove away. Not to escape, but to prepare. I drove for several minutes without realizing where the road was taking me. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, something unfamiliar was forming, something that felt like a calm storm rising from deep water. I passed the grocery store, the library where I had spent half my life helping strangers find stories that mattered, and the small park Henry and I used to walk through on Sunday mornings. I should have turned toward my friend's neighborhood, the place I claimed I was heading, but my body refused to follow the lie I had spoken earlier that day. My thoughts moved too quickly for my voice, and the air in the car felt heavy with the weight of what I had heard. When I reached the end of the street where my friend lived, I slowed the car and let the engine idle. Her porch light was off, the curtains drawn, the wind barely brushing the leaves of her maple tree. I stayed in the car, fingers resting lightly on the steering wheel, watching the slow rise and fall of my breath in the reflection of the window. I knew I should step out, walk to her door, and pretend I had simply arrived early. But stepping onto that porch felt wrong. It felt like entering a world I no longer belonged to. Instead, I opened my banking app with a thumb that trembled more than I wanted to admit. The screen glowed back at me, too bright, too clean for the mess my life had suddenly become. I scrolled through the recent activity, expecting small expenses, automatic payments, maybe a donation I had forgotten I scheduled. What I found instead made my throat tighten. 4 transfers, all within the last 48 hours. One for $14,500, another for $9,200. 2 smaller ones that felt like bait on a hook, meant to mask the true intention. My breath caught when I saw the receiving accounts. One belonged to Sierra, The other belonged to a name I did not recognize at first, a bland-sounding business that felt too generic to be real. Hillside Partners, LLC. The moment I read it, something cold slid into my chest. It didn't sound like a legitimate business. It didn't even sound like a local one. It felt like a mask, something used to hide hands that never intended to be clean. I stared at the transfers for several long seconds, pressing my lips together to keep from making any sound. I imagined Nolan approving them with the ease of someone sending a holiday gift, convinced he was doing the right thing for reasons I could not understand yet. I pressed the call button next to the bank's customer service number. The hold music was too cheerful, too light for the heaviness sitting in my ribs. When a representative finally answered, her voice was gentle and warm, and for a moment, I almost allowed myself to believe she could fix everything with a simple click. But reality did not bend so easily. She explained that someone with access to my old medical authorization had full permission to move funds on my behalf, a document I had signed years ago, when I was recovering from pneumonia, had opened a door I never meant to use again. Nolan had been listed then because he was my only child. I trusted him. I wanted him to be able to help if something happened. That trust, once soft and steady, now cut deeper than any blade. The representative apologized several times, her voice full of sympathy, but the truth remained the same. The transfers were legal unless I proved otherwise. I thanked her with a steadiness I did not feel, ended the call, and let the silence sink back into the car. I considered driving home and confronting Nolan immediately. I imagined the conversation, the shock on his face, the excuses he might use to shield the truth. But the image felt wrong, too loud, too desperate. And I knew instinctively that confronting him now would only destroy whatever chance I had to understand why he had done this. If Sierra was as calculating as she sounded, she would be expecting me to act emotionally. That was the one thing I could not allow myself to do. So I sat in the car, breathing slowly, thinking carefully. I needed time. I needed distance. I needed a place where no one would expect me to be. A hotel. Not a familiar one. Not the small family-owned inn near my neighborhood. Somewhere anonymous. Somewhere I could disappear for a day without raising suspicion. I typed the nearest option into my phone and began driving, each turn of the wheel steady, precise, deliberate. The hotel was nothing special, just a row of rooms shaped like a long, tired smile. The afternoon sun reflected off the metal railings, giving everything a washed-out glow. When I entered the lobby, the woman at the desk barely glanced up from her computer. She asked for my name, swiped my card, and handed me a key without a single question. That anonymity comforted me more than I expected. Inside the room, I locked the door and stood still, letting the plainness settle around me. Beige curtains, a small table, a bed that felt too stiff to ever soften. It was all perfect, unremarkable, safe from wandering eyes. I sat down and reviewed the transfers again. The numbers blurred at the edges, but they still felt sharp enough to cut. I wrote them down in a small notebook I carried for grocery lists and library recommendations. Today, its purpose shifted. It became a place to gather pieces of a truth I had not asked for. As I studied the list, another thought rose in my mind, slow and unwelcome. If Nolan had accessed my accounts, what else could he reach? The cabin deed, my small emergency fund, the bonds Henry and I bought when Nolan was a baby. I felt a trembling inside. Not fear, but something older. Something like a mother's instinct hardening into resolve. I left the notebook on the table, walked to the window, and watched cars pass. Each one seemed to move with purpose. Each one belonged to someone who did not know the ground could crumble beneath their feet without warning. I wondered how many people had sat in this very room feeling the same stunned stillness I felt now, realizing trust had teeth. I closed the curtain gently. The room dimmed. My heartbeat slowed. I was no longer the woman who brewed tea that morning. I was someone else now. Someone who would gather answers quietly. Someone who would move without being seen. Someone who would not be fooled twice. I whispered into the stillness, letting the words shape the beginning of a path I had never imagined walking. I'm not done. Not by a long shot. I woke earlier than I expected, long before the sun had a chance to lift itself over the horizon. The hotel room was still dim, carrying the faint smell of detergent and old carpet, but my mind was already alert. I lay there for a moment, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and letting my thoughts settle like dust floating through a beam of light. I knew I couldn't stay hidden all day. I needed answers, and there was only one person who could help me understand what I was looking at. Calvin Reed, my neighbor, my friend in the quiet way older people often become friends, through years of shared fences, occasional cookies on holidays, and conversations about weather patterns that never stayed about weather for long. I sat up slowly and reached for my bag, pulling out the small notebook where I had written the strange transfers from the day before. The numbers looked even colder in the morning light. I touched the page with my fingertips, as if that would help me understand how something so simple could carry so much weight. Calvin would know what these numbers meant. He had spent his entire career buried in financial ledgers and tax filings, always patient, always precise. If anyone could trace the shape of a lie hidden inside paperwork, it was him. I left the hotel quietly and made my way back toward my neighborhood. The streets were just beginning to brighten, and a few runners passed by, unaware of the storm I carried inside me. When I reached Calvin's house, I hesitated before ringing the bell. I wondered what I would say, how much I would reveal. But when he opened the door, wearing a soft navy sweatshirt and holding a mug that smelled like cinnamon, the words came easily. "Adele," he said, eyebrows lifting in concern. "You're out early. Everything all right?" "Not exactly," I said. "I need your help and your discretion." He stepped aside without a single question, and that small gesture settled something inside me. I walked into his kitchen, a warm place lined with plants and shelves full of mismatched mugs. He motioned for me to sit at the table, and I slid the notebook across to him. He studied the numbers, his face tightening almost immediately. Then he looked up at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. "Where did this come from?" he asked quietly. "My bank account," I said. "The transfers were made without my knowledge. And I think there's more." He exhaled slowly, set his mug down, and brought his laptop to the table. I watched his fingers move with careful precision, the same way a doctor might handle fragile bone. He searched state registries, business directories, public tax records, and something else I didn't recognize but trusted because Calvin was the one doing it. Each click felt like a step deeper into a darkness I had not asked to enter. After several minutes, he turned the screen toward me. "There is no physical office for this business," he said. "The address listed is a storage unit. This is not a real company. It's a shell." The word hung in the air, heavy and cold. A shell. Something hollow pretending to be solid. Something that hides other things inside. Who would run something like this? I asked, and though part of me already knew Sierra's involvement was not a coincidence. Calvin typed again, tracing names, cross-referencing old filings, old audits, even an archived business complaint. Then he stopped, leaned closer, and pointed at a line of text that made the hairs on my neck rise. There's a past investigation linked to an alias, he said. It matches Sierra's age and general background. A sealed file from 8 years ago involving financial misconduct. No conviction, but it shows a pattern. My chest tightened. So she's done this before. It looks that way, he said. She didn't act alone back then either. He clicked one more document and a name appeared on the screen with a quiet finality. This man, Damian Kessler. He's been involved in questionable financial setups before. Nothing that stuck legally, but enough noise to show intention. I stared at the name. The clean white background of the page made the letters look darker than they were. Something about the simplicity of it made fear grow inside me, slow and steady. "Calvin," I said softly, "I think Nolan is in deeper than he realizes." He nodded, tapping the notebook gently. "This is organized. Not a simple act of desperation. If Sierra is connected to this man, then she's running a playbook she already knows. And if Nolan is wrapped up in it, even unknowingly, he could face consequences he can't anticipate." My throat felt tight. I need to protect him, but I need to protect myself too. "That's exactly why we need more information," he said. "Let me run deeper checks. We might be able to link certain transactions or patterns. And Adele, we need to be careful. These people know how to cover their tracks." I sat back in my chair, letting the weight of everything settle over me. The kitchen felt warm and safe, a sharp contrast to the cold truth sitting between us. I looked at Calvin's face, steady and earnest, and felt gratitude pulse through me. "I didn't want to believe what I heard," I said quietly. "But now, I can't pretend it was a misunderstanding." "No," he said softly. "You can't." He stood, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a folder. He placed it in front of me. Inside were blank forms, checklists, and a small guide on gathering personal financial evidence. He slid a pen toward me and held my gaze. "This is where you start," he said. "We are going to build a full picture, slowly, carefully. You're not alone in this." His words warmed something in my chest that had been frozen since yesterday morning. I took the pen, nodding slowly, letting determination settle into the spaces fear had hollowed out. "Thank you," I said. "I'm not sure how this ends yet." He gave me a sad, gentle smile. "We'll take it one step at a time. And whatever you find, remember this: the truth never stays buried forever." I closed the folder, held it to my chest, and exhaled. I felt stronger than I expected. Not unbroken, but steady, ready to see what lay beneath the surface. I stood, thanked him again, and walked out into the morning light, holding the truth closer than I ever had. I knew the path ahead would not be easy, but I was no longer walking blindly. I had taken my first real step. I drove back toward my house with a sense of purpose that felt sharper than fear. The morning had ripened into afternoon, the sunlight resting low and warm across the roofs of the neighborhood. But none of that softened what waited for me behind my own front door. I kept my speed steady, not too fast, not too slow, careful not to draw attention. If I learned anything from the years I spent shelving books and watching people search for answers, it was that the truth did not always appear in loud moments. Sometimes it whispered from the shadows. When I reached the end of my street, I turned off the engine and sat still for a few breaths. My house stood quiet, almost peaceful. If I hadn't already heard what I heard, I could have convinced myself everything was ordinary. But the silence felt staged, like the stillness before a storm. I stepped out of the car, closed the door gently, and moved along the sidewalk as if I were someone else entirely. someone unrecognizable to the version of me from yesterday. I didn't walk to the front door. Instead, I followed the narrow path along the side of the house, the one lined with shrubs Henry planted decades ago. My hand brushed the leaves as I passed, a small reminder that some pieces of my life still belong to me. I paused near the window overlooking the driveway. The blinds were half open, and the angle allowed me to see a sliver of the garage door through the reflection on the glass. I reached the side entrance and held my breath as I turned the knob. It was unlocked. Nolan was careless that way, always assuming nothing bad could happen in his world. The hallway smelled faintly of his cologne, something sharp and overly confident. I stood still until my pulse settled, then slipped deeper inside, each step soft enough to blend into the creaks of the floor. Voices came from the garage, not loud, but close enough for me to hear the rhythm of their conversation. I moved toward the doorway leading there and stopped, positioning myself behind the line where shadow met light. From that angle, I could see just enough without revealing myself. Sierra stood near my small safe. She had pulled it from the shelf and placed it on the workbench, her fingers moving with practiced ease. She wasn't searching through it like a curious person. She handled it like someone who already knew what she wanted. The sound of papers sliding against one another drifted through the air, followed by the faint rustle of envelopes. My chest tightened. Nolan stood beside her, shifting his weight anxiously, glancing toward the door every few seconds. His shoulders drooped in a way that told me he wasn't as confident as he had sounded earlier that day. I studied him carefully, noticing every flicker of hesitation. It hurt to see those soft cracks because they reminded me of the boy he used to be, the one who brought me flowers he picked from the yard, even when I told him to leave them for the bees. Sierra lifted the cabin deed, smoothing it against the table with a slow, deliberate motion. "We need this done by Monday," she said, tapping the corner of the document with her perfectly manicured nail. "Cash buyers don't wait." Nolan swallowed hard. "Are you sure this is the right time?" he asked, voice low. "It feels rushed." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You know why we have to do it now, before she notices anything." She stepped closer to him, brushing her hand along his arm. "We're doing the smart thing. Trust me." I saw the moment he allowed that touch to settle his nerves. He looked down, nodded, and picked up the wooden memory box that had sat quietly in my safe for years. The sight of his hands on that box sent a sharp, aching pressure through my chest. That box had been a gift from him when he was a child, carved during a school project, sanded by hands too small to grip the tool properly. It held fragments of our life, small mementos that meant nothing to anyone but us. Sierra opened the lid, completely unaware of what it held. She glanced inside, uninterested, then set it aside carelessly. The way she touched it made my eyes sting, but I forced myself not to make a sound. Nolan looked at the box for a split second longer than necessary, as if a memory tugged at him. But Sierra moved on, and he followed her lead. She scanned my deed, photographing each page with her phone. "Once this is processed," she said, "we'll be done with it. She won't know until everything is finalized." Nolan hesitated again. "I just don't want to hurt her." "You're helping us survive," she replied. "That's not hurting. That's adapting." Her words were smooth, but underneath them was a steel edge meant to corner him. I saw his shoulders sink, resignation settling into the spaces where doubt once lived. The sound of the phone capturing another image echoed in the garage. My breath felt tight in my throat. I reached slowly into my coat pocket and pulled out my old phone, the one Henry always teased me about keeping even after I upgraded. Its battery was weak, but its recording apps still worked. I pressed the screen gently, making sure the microphone faced the open doorway. The small glow of the device felt like a spark in the shadows. Sierra moved to the shelf and began sorting through a stack of letters. "The sooner we finish this, the sooner we move," she said. "I'm tired of waiting." Her tone was sharp, almost impatient. The kind of tone that belonged to someone eager for a payday rather than stability. Nolan didn't answer. He just stood there, looking at the scattered documents as if they were pieces of a life he didn't recognize anymore. She turned to him and said, "Don't back out now. We're too close." "I'm not backing out," he whispered, though I wasn't sure he believed it. I stepped deeper into the shadows, heart beating in slow, steady thumps. Every instinct in me wanted to burst through the doorway, grab the deed, and pull him away from her. But reacting like a wounded parent would only feed the trap they were setting. I needed to see everything. I needed the full picture. Sierra placed the deed back on the table and said, "Monday morning, we move fast." Nolan nodded again, though his eyes flickered toward the door as if searching for a way out. I made sure he never saw me. I stayed hidden, silent, steady. When they finally left the garage, carrying the documents with them, I remained in the shadows until their footsteps disappeared down the hallway. Only then did I press a hand against my chest and breathe deeply, letting the weight of what I had witnessed settle into place. This was no misunderstanding, no moment of weakness. This was a plan, a deliberate, organized plan that carved pieces out of the life I had built. I stepped forward slowly, touched the wooden box, and felt the grooves of the carving beneath my fingers. It was the only warm thing in the cold space around me. I held it for a moment before setting it back gently in its place. Then I whispered, "I see you, both of you, and I won't let you finish this." I slipped out of the garage as quietly as I had entered. I did not run. I did not panic. I walked with the calm certainty of someone who had seen enough to understand the road ahead. I was no longer gathering suspicions. I was gathering proof. I didn't drive. Straight to Vivian's office. I spent a few minutes sitting in my car, hands resting on the steering wheel, steadying my breath. What I had witnessed in the garage stayed with me like a cold hand pressed against the back of my neck. The image of Sierra photographing my cabin deed kept replaying in my mind, each flash of her camera feeling like another thread being cut from the life I spent decades building. I had always believed that betrayal from strangers hurt in a clean, sharp way. But betrayal from blood was different. It didn't cut. It hollowed. I turned the key, backed out slowly, and made my way toward downtown. My nerves were taut, but my purpose was firm. I had enough fragments now to know Nolan wasn't acting alone, and I needed someone who understood the laws that stood between me and the quiet devastation unfolding around me. Vivian Delgado was not just any attorney. She had helped me with a small estate question years earlier after Henry passed. She was young then, still finding her footing, but her mind had been sharp and her kindness steady. I hoped those parts of her hadn't changed. The drive felt longer than usual. Buildings passed in a blur, and the soft hum of the engine became a grounding rhythm. When I parked near her office building, I sat for another moment, gathering myself. I knew this conversation would shape everything that came next. I needed to be clear, precise, brave in a quiet way. Vivian's office was located in a modest brick building with a blue awning, the kind of place most people walked past without noticing. I climbed the narrow stairs, each step measured, and opened the door to a warm room filled with the subtle scent of paper and sandalwood. Vivian looked up from her desk, her dark hair pulled into a clean bun, glasses perched low on her nose. "Adele?" she said with surprise. Is everything all right? I closed the door behind me. No, I said gently. I don't think it is. She gestured for me to sit, concern threading through her expression. I handed her the notebook containing the transfer amounts, along with a few printouts I had brought from the hotel. She skimmed them, her brow furrowing deeper with each line. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. Not every detail, but enough for her to understand the shape of what was happening. I kept my voice steady, even when describing the moment I heard my son laugh in the garage. Vivian listened without interrupting, her pen tapping lightly against the pad on her desk. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. Adele, she said, you're dealing with something serious. And if what you described is accurate, the actions taken against you could fall under several categories, none of them minor. I know, I said softly. I need to understand my options. Well, she said, lifting the first page of the transfers. The fact that the financial moves were executed through an old medical authorization complicates things. It gives Nolan temporary legal cover, at least on paper. It's not ironclad, but it gives him space to argue he believed he had permission. I swallowed hard. And Sierra? Vivian shook her head. She has no legal standing. She shouldn't have access to your accounts at all. And the involvement of a business like this, she tapped the line listing Hillside Partners LLC, is a red flag. I nodded. Calvin believes it's a shell. He found links to past issues involving Sierra. That tracks, she said. But before we can freeze anything or challenge anything, we need evidence. Hard evidence, not just conversations you overheard. I recorded a few seconds, I said quietly. Not perfect, but something. Vivian looked up sharply. That could help, depending on how it's captured. But we need more. We need documentation that shows intent, patterns, a trail. Her tone was calm, steady, but there was a layer of urgency beneath it. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were printouts, instructions, and a checklist. She slid it toward me. This, she said, is how we build a foundation. You'll need to gather every statement, every receipt, every document involving the cabin, the bank account, the bonds, anything with your signature on it. I placed my hand on the folder. I can do that. There's more, she continued. You must avoid any open confrontation. If Sierra suspects you know, she'll accelerate whatever she's planning. And if this is an organized scheme, the man behind her, this Damien, will move even faster. People like him do not hesitate. The name felt heavy in the air. I nodded slowly. I won't confront them. Not yet. Good, she said. I'll contact a private investigator I trust. And I want you to keep Calvin close. People like him, detail-oriented, patient, are valuable in situations like this. I exhaled, relief washing through me in a slow wave. Thank you. Vivian offered a small smile. You're not alone in this, but you need to be smart and steady. The law will catch up, but only if we build the right path to lead it. I looked out the window, watching a man walk his dog across the street. Life continued in its ordinary rhythm outside, as if my world hadn't shifted dramatically in the last 24 hours. There was something grounding about that, something that reminded me that chaos could be contained with careful steps. I don't want to destroy Nolan, I whispered. I just want him out of whatever this is. Vivian looked at me with a softness I hadn't expected. Wanting justice doesn't mean wanting destruction. You can love someone and still hold them accountable. Sometimes that's the most honest kind of love. Her words sank into me like warm water. I closed my eyes for a moment and let them settle. When I opened them, again, I felt a sense of clarity that had been missing all morning. "What happens next?" I asked. "We gather," she said. "We document. We prepare. And we wait for the right moment to act. Timing is everything in situations like this." I nodded. "I understand." She handed me a small envelope containing her direct line. "Call me if anything shifts, if they move quickly, if you hear anything else." I slipped it into my purse and rose from the chair. "I'll be careful." "I know you will," she said. As I walked toward the door, I felt a steadiness return to me. Not strength exactly, but something quieter, deeper. A rootedness that came from knowing I was not stepping into the dark blindly. I had allies. I had a plan forming, and I had a truth that would not be silenced. When I reached the street, the first cool breeze of the afternoon brushed against my face. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it settle into my bones. Then I opened them and whispered to myself, "You're not taking this from me." I pressed my hand to my purse, feeling the folder inside, and walked toward my car with a new sense of grounding. The next steps would be difficult, but I was ready. The next morning arrived with a muted gray sky, the kind that reminded me of old photographs left too long in a drawer. I felt the weight of everything I had learned tightening around me, yet it didn't crush me. It anchored me. I left the house early, long before Nolan or Sierra could stir from whatever restless sleep people like them had after plotting the ruin of someone who trusted them. The air was cool, carrying a faint scent of pine, and for a moment I let it fill my lungs. I needed that clarity. Calvin had agreed to meet me at the community center's small reading room, a quiet place tucked behind the main hall. It was where local volunteers sorted donated books and where retired teachers gathered sometimes to chat. It was neutral ground, away from my home, away from the shadows Sierra had filled with her intentions. When I walked inside, the lights were low, and the only sound was the soft hum of the air purifier in the corner. Calvin sat at a table with his laptop open, a stack of papers beside him, and 2 mugs steaming gently. "I wasn't sure what you would need this morning," he said softly, "so I brought tea, the same blend Henry liked." The gesture hit deeper than he knew. I sat across from him, warmed my hands on the mug, and nodded. "Thank you, truly." He slid a page toward me. "I dug deeper last night. I didn't want to call you until I had something concrete." His voice lowered. "There's more." I braced myself. "Tell me." He tapped the page. "This company, Hillside Partners, has shown up in 3 states under different addresses, all of them fake. Each time, it operated for 6 to 9 months, then vanished. The patterns match a similar setup tied to a man named Damien Kessler. The name felt heavier today, like it carried its own atmosphere. Calvin continued. "He's been involved in multiple questionable investments and financial structures. Nothing he could be charged for, at least not yet. He's clever. He creates systems other people get tangled in and then steps out before consequences arrive." "So he creates traps," I said quietly. He nodded. "Traps that look like opportunities to the people he recruits." My stomach tightened. "Nolan," Calvin's eyes softened. "People like your son, good-hearted underneath old wounds, are exactly the kind of people men like Kessler target. They don't start with greed. They start with fear. Fear of failing. Fear of being small. Fear of disappointing someone they love." I looked down at my hands, feeling the slow ache of that truth. Sierra knows how to feed those fears. "She's worked with Kessler before," he said. "At least, that's what the records suggest." The sealed case from 8 years ago involved a woman using 2 different last names. The details match her age, her background, even the city she lived in. It wasn't just one mistake. It was part of a pattern. A quiet tension settled between us. The soft rustle of papers felt louder than it should have. "What else did you find?" I asked. He clicked through several files on his laptop. Past victims, some older, some young professionals, all of them people with assets, but limited financial awareness. A few tried to pursue charges, but the cases disappeared just before they gained traction. Witnesses retracted statements, documentation vanished. My breath shook slightly. So they're good at erasing trails. For a while, Calvin said gently. But people like this always leave something behind. A missed detail, a stray form, a timeline that doesn't line up. He pulled up one last page and turned the screen toward me. Here's what ties everything together. Transfers from accounts similar to yours, all funneled to shell companies connected to Kessler. Not directly, but through layers of names and addresses. I felt my chest tighten. So Sierra's role, she isn't just following orders. She's practiced, he said. She doesn't flinch because she's done this before. A coldness settled at the base of my spine, as if the room had darkened without the lights changing. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, grounding myself. "I need to see the cabin," I said suddenly. Calvin blinked. "What do you mean?" "If they're planning to move everything by Monday, and Sierra already has the deed, there might be something there. Something they didn't think to remove yet." I paused. "Something that connects her to this man." He studied me carefully. "You think she used the cabin for something?" "I don't know," I said. "But that place holds pieces of my life. It's where Henry and I kept our old files. It's where Nolan spent summers running through the trees. And lately, it's where Sierra keeps insisting we sell. That pressure has meaning, and I need to understand it." Calvin hesitated. "We should be cautious." "I will be," I said. "I won't go at night. I won't confront anyone. I will just look." He folded his hands, thinking. "If you go, take your old phone with you, the one with the recorder, and let me check in every hour." I nodded. "I can do that." Before gathering everything, Calvin handed me another sheet. "One more thing. Your name appears on a list connected to Hillside's internal documents. It looks like Sierra submitted information about you weeks ago. Not her first step. A step in a long process." The air in my chest seemed to thin. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, steadying myself. "So they have been planning this longer than I knew." He nodded gently. "But now you know, and now you can move carefully." I gathered the documents, thanking him softly. When I stood, he touched my shoulder with a reassuring hand. "Adele," he said, "you're walking into something larger than a family dispute. But you're not walking alone." I placed my hand over his briefly. "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't." I left the community center with the folder tucked under my arm and a quiet resolve settling over me. As I stepped into the afternoon light, I felt the weight of the truth pressing against me, not crushing, but guiding. Each step toward my car felt deliberate. Each breath steadied my purpose. The cabin held answers, maybe not all of them, but enough to show me how deep the roots of this scheme reached into my life. Enough to remind me that my memories, my marriage, my home, and my son were not pieces I would surrender easily. As I unlocked my car, I whispered to myself, "You're not just looking for evidence. You're reclaiming what's yours." The wind brushed across my face, carrying the scent of pine again, as if the world wanted to remind me of the path ahead. I started the engine, turned toward Prescott, and drove with a steadiness that came not from fear, but from clarity. The drive to the cabin felt different this time. I had traveled this road countless times before, always with a sense of familiarity, comfort, even nostalgia. But on this day, the pine-lined highway felt like a narrow passageway carrying me toward something I had not yet fully prepared myself to face. The farther I drove, the quieter the world became. Even the trees seemed to lean inward, as if listening. The air sharpened as I reached the turnoff leading to Prescott. The cabin sat a little ways into the woods, tucked between tall evergreens that Henry once called guardians. He believed the place had a spirit, something still and steady that kept watch over us. I wondered what he would think now, knowing strangers had spoken about selling it as if it were nothing more than a profit, waiting to be claimed. When I pulled up beside the familiar wooden porch, I cut the engine and sat for a moment, letting the hush of the forest surround me. A part of me expected the door to swing open, revealing Sierra or Nolan standing inside, but everything remained motionless. Only the faint rustling of branches gave the scene any life. I stepped out of the car, my feet crunching softly on the path of pine needles. The cabin's windows reflected the pale afternoon light, and for a moment, the place looked exactly as it always had. Safe, quiet, wrapped in the smell of cedar and soil. I took a slow breath and walked up the steps, each one groaning under my weight like an old friend clearing its throat. The key turned smoothly in the lock. I pushed the door open and felt the familiar air settle around me, carrying the scent of dust and wood polish. The cabin was still mine in ways that mattered. Henry's old fishing rods leaned against the corner. The small rug we bought at a street fair 20 years ago lay in its usual place. But there was something else beneath the surface, something I could sense even before I saw it. I moved through the living room, careful not to alter anything more than necessary. My eyes scanned the walls, the shelves, the desk near the window. Nothing was missing, but something felt touched, slightly rearranged. The air had a subtle disturbance, the way a room feels when someone has stood in it recently. I walked to the back, where we kept old family boxes stored beneath a loose floorboard. I knelt and lifted the board with a soft scrape, revealing a space where we used to keep childhood drawings, marriage papers, and old photographs. A few items looked shifted, edges not aligned the way Henry used to insist on. Someone had been here. My pulse steadied instead of rising. It was a strange sensation, almost like stepping onto a stage I didn't know I had rehearsed for. I reached into the small gap, feeling around the edges until my fingers brushed something cool and metallic. A small flash drive lay wedged beneath the last box, tucked so far into the corner it might have been overlooked by anyone searching in a hurry. I held it up to the light and felt the weight of it in my palm. It wasn't mine. It didn't belong to this place, and that made it important. I plugged it into my old laptop, the one I kept at the cabin for reading and writing letters. The screen flickered for a moment before showing a list of files, emails, documents, spreadsheets, and a few audio recordings. Each file name carried a thread that I knew would lead me deeper into the truth. My hand trembled slightly as I opened the first document. It was a summary of transactions from various individuals, all older, all living alone, all with savings or property that could easily disappear without immediate notice. Next were email exchanges between Sierra and a man whose tone was cold, clipped, and confident. His words left no room for misinterpretation. He instructed, corrected, and expected obedience. This had to be the man Calvin mentioned. I clicked on one of the audio files. A voice filled the room. Smooth but severe. like someone used to getting exactly what he wanted. He spoke about schedules, about assigning roles, about getting the final signatures lined up. I listened, my stomach tightening with every sentence. Then Sierra's voice responded, confirming details, outlining steps she planned to take, even mentioning Nolan's name with a casual firmness that stung more than I expected. She spoke about my cabin, my bank account, my health. She framed everything like assets on a ledger, not pieces of a life lived with care. I heard Nolan's name again, this time paired with a sigh from her, the sound of someone tolerating a person who didn't fully understand the game. Then came a line that made my breath catch. "If he hesitates, we move without him," the man said. "He's useful, not essential." Useful, not essential. Hearing strangers speak about my son that way, even after everything I had seen, made something inside me sharpen. Nolan wasn't innocent, but he wasn't heartless either. He was a man caught between desperation and manipulation, pulled by people who knew how to twist insecurities into obedience. I opened another audio file and heard a conversation discussing what would happen after the cabin sale. Sierra said she wanted to cut ties quickly and leave him with whatever story he needs to tell himself. That line hit harder than I expected. She wasn't just using him, she was discarding him. I took a slow breath, letting the truth settle inside me. I needed to gather everything here, every file, every recording, every email. I copied them onto a second drive I had brought with me, making sure the transfer completed fully before I unplugged anything. The room felt heavier as I worked, not with fear, but with the understanding that knowledge is sometimes the most powerful tool a person can carry. When I finally shut the laptop, I sat for a moment on Henry's old chair, letting the stillness of the cabin wash over me. I felt him here somehow, not as a presence, but as a memory guiding me. I placed my hand on the wooden armrest and whispered, "Thank you for building this place strong enough to hold the truth." I gathered the flash drive, tucked it carefully into my jacket pocket, and took one last look around the cabin. The walls, the shelves, the floorboards, they all felt different now. Not violated, but awakened. As I stepped outside, the wind stirred through the trees, brushing against my skin like a quiet reminder that sometimes the answers we fear hold the power to free us. I locked the cabin door with steady hands and walked toward my car, the evidence pressed safely against my side. The road ahead was going to be difficult, but with each new discovery, my fear was shrinking while my resolve grew sharper. When I opened the car door, I whispered the words that rose from a place deeper than anger. "You made the first move," I said softly. "Now I know how to answer." Then I started the engine and drove back toward the life they thought I would lose, carrying the truth with me like a quiet flame. I drove back into town with the flash drive resting safely in my coat pocket, its small weight reminding me of everything I had finally uncovered. By the time I reached my street, the sun had already started its slow descent, painting long shadows across the houses. I parked 2 blocks away instead of pulling into my driveway. I didn't want anyone to hear the engine or see me arrive. I needed to move carefully, the way someone walks through a house at night without turning on a light. As I walked toward my home, I rehearsed the calm I knew I had to wear. Sierra was the type of person who read tension the way others read newspaper headlines. Any misstep, any crack in my voice, any look that lingered too long could push her into action. And if she believed I suspected her, she would not hesitate to accelerate whatever she and Nolan had planned. When I reached my front door, I took a slow breath, smoothed the expression on my face, and unlocked it as quietly as possible. The house greeted me with its usual silence. I walked through the hallway, listening for any sign of movement, but everything seemed still. For a moment, a strange thought crossed my mind. Maybe Nolan and Sierra weren't home. But when I reached the kitchen, I heard soft clinks, the familiar sounds of plates being arranged. Sierra stood at the counter, her hands moving quickly as she prepared dinner. She didn't look up immediately, but when she did, she offered a smile that felt too polished, too rehearsed. Nolan sat at the table, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on a small pile of receipts. His face looked pale, as if sleep had not found him easily. "There you are," Sierra said, her tone smooth. "We were starting to wonder when you'd be back." "I took the long way home," I replied, keeping my voice steady. Traffic was heavier than I expected. She gave a small laugh. "This town barely has traffic, Adele." I set my purse down carefully. You'd be surprised what can slow a person down. Something flickered in her eyes, but she masked it quickly. She gestured toward the dining table. "Sit. Eat with us. I tried a new recipe, and I want your opinion." Her insistence wasn't hospitality. It was control, an attempt to keep me close, to read my movements, to measure what I did or didn't know. I felt a strange calm settle through me. Let her think she was in control. Let her believe I was walking blindly. "Of course," I said softly. "Let me wash my hands first." In the bathroom, behind the safety of a closed door, I allowed myself one long breath. The flash drive sat warm against my chest inside my jacket. I looked at myself in the mirror and whispered the reminder I needed. "You're acting now, not reacting." When I returned to the kitchen, Sierra had set the table with almost theatrical precision. Cloth napkins folded neatly, forks aligned, a small vase with 2 daisies in the center. Nolan avoided eye contact, his shoulders tense enough to tremble. I took my seat, smoothing the napkin on my lap. "This looks lovely." "It should," she replied with a light smile. "I worked hard on it." She served the food as if she were hosting guests, not quietly dismantling the life of the woman across from her. I watched her closely, but without letting it show. Her eyes were bright, too bright, like someone performing for an audience. Nolan kept his head down, pushing his food lightly with his fork. "How was your day?" Sierra asked, her voice floating lightly across the table. "Calm," I said. "Uneventful." A tiny shift in her jaw told me she didn't believe the ease of my answer, but she continued the conversation. She talked about small things, weather, errands, an article she had read. Her conversation danced around anything meaningful, like someone weaving a net without letting the threads meet. When she paused to take a sip of water, I placed my hand lightly on the table and said, "I've been thinking a lot about the cabin lately." Her eyes lifted, sharp and alert behind her polite smile. "Oh? In what way?" "I keep wondering if I should make some decisions about it sooner rather than later. Maybe organize some old files, prepare things if we ever decide to move forward with anything." I said it gently, letting the words slip out like idle thoughts rather than careful tools. Sierra blinked once. Then she smiled again, too quickly. "Well," she said, "I think that's a great idea. Staying ahead of things is always smart. Nolan and I have talked about it too, actually. We were thinking maybe, She stopped herself, a small stutter in her confidence. "Maybe what?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Nothing important," she said quickly. "Just possibilities." Nolan shifted in his chair, his eyes flicking toward Sierra and then toward the table, as if afraid of the space between them. His fingers tapped against the wood, barely audible, but I recognized nervous patterns when I heard them. He wasn't fully aligned with her, Not anymore. I took a small bite, set my fork down, and looked between them. You two always seem to be thinking ahead. It must feel good, being so prepared. Sierra smiled again, but the edges were tighter now. We try. And you always know what you're doing. Of course, she said, her voice light but her eyes too focused. It's important not to leave things to chance. I folded my napkin gently, the way I used to when Nolan was little, and I wanted him to see calm in my movements. You're right. Chance can be dangerous. One careless word, one overlooked detail, and everything can change. For the first time since I had arrived home, she stiffened. It was small, nearly invisible, but it was there. A shift in posture, a seam splitting open just enough for truth to breathe. Nolan cleared his throat. Mom, are you saying something happened? I shook my head softly. Nothing at all. I'm just talking. Sierra's eyes stayed on me a moment too long before she returned to her plate. But her movements lost their smoothness. She lifted her fork with more force. Her breathing changed, just slightly, but enough for me to hear. Then, as if she couldn't stop herself, she spoke again. Well, the cabin will need to be handled soon, she said. If certain transactions go through, it'll make everything easier. I felt my pulse steady. What transactions? Her expression flickered, then reset. Just hypothetical ones. I gave her a gentle smile, one that held no threat, no accusation, just quiet observation. I'm glad you're thinking ahead, I said softly. It helps me understand the timeline. Nolan's fork clattered against his plate. Sierra shot him a glare so sharp it cut the air between them. I felt the shift then, small, quiet, but unmistakable. The first fracture in their alliance. Dinner continued, but Sierra spoke less. Nolan barely touched his food. I let the silence settle between us, letting it speak truths they didn't realize I had already heard recorded in that cabin. When the meal was over, I thanked Sierra for cooking. She forced a smile so brittle it could have cracked with the slightest touch. Nolan avoided my eyes as he collected the dishes. I walked to my room with a steady step and closed the door softly behind me. I had what I needed, proof in my pocket. And now, the first careless slip from Sierra's composure. She didn't know it, but she had confirmed what the recordings had already revealed. And tomorrow, everything would begin to shift. I barely slept that night. Not because fear kept me awake, but because clarity did. The kind of clarity that arrives after you've seen enough to understand the shape of a lie and the size of the damage it intends to cause. I lay in the dark, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak in the floorboards, waiting for the house to settle into the stillness that always came just before dawn. Sierra's slip at dinner echoed in my mind, not as a surprise, but as confirmation. Her confidence had cracked, and cracks, once formed, only widen. When the first pale light of morning filtered into my room, I rose quietly, moving through the house with deliberate calm. Nolan and Sierra were still asleep. Their door remained closed, and the muffled quiet from inside told me they had not slept peacefully. That was good. Doubt was beginning to eat at them, especially at Nolan, and doubt, when it finally blooms, always reaches for the truth behind it. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea warming my hands, the steam rising gently in the cool morning air. I waited. Not long after, I heard the soft shuffle of footsteps. Nolan appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled, his face pale, eyes heavy with something beyond exhaustion. He looked at me the way a man looks at a shadow he can't outrun. "Morning," he said, voice rough. Morning, I replied. Tea? He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. I poured him a cup, slid it toward him, and watched as he wrapped both hands around it. He didn't drink right away. He stared at the table, tapping his thumb lightly, a nervous rhythm. Mom, he said finally, did I seem strange last night? I lifted my cup, blowing gently across the surface. You seem tired. Yeah, he said, nodding too quickly. Yeah, I was tired. Just a lot going on. I held his gaze for a moment, then looked down at my tea. Everyone gets overwhelmed sometimes. That's human. He swallowed hard, as if my words brushed against something fragile inside him. We sat quietly until Sierra entered the kitchen with her usual briskness, makeup already done, hair smoothed and perfect. She carried a practiced smile, but her eyes flitted across the room like someone checking for open windows. I have errands, she announced. I'll be gone most of the morning. Nolan flinched. I thought you said we were going to review the paperwork today. Her expression sharpened just for a heartbeat before smoothing again. Plans changed. Don't worry about it. She grabbed her bag and left with a click of the door, the sound cutting through the kitchen like a blade. When the silence settled, Nolan let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since last night. He leaned forward, voice dropping. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever feel like things are happening faster than you can keep up? Like you blink, and suddenly everything is already decided, and you didn't even get to choose? The pain inside that question was real, raw, and it came from a place of someone who had been pushed, prodded, hurried into choices he didn't fully understand. I set my cup down gently. Yes, I said evenly. I think everyone feels that at some point. He closed his eyes briefly, his jaw tightening. I don't know what's happening anymore. Sierra says one thing, then another. She keeps telling me to trust her. But lately, I don't know what I'm trusting. This was the opening I had been waiting for, not to accuse, not to corner, but to plant the seed of the truth he needed to see for himself. I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not the full proof, not the recordings, just one fragment. One line of text I had copied from the flash drive in Prescott. I slid it across the table. I found this yesterday. His eyes moved quickly across the page. When he reached the part mentioning his name, his breath hitched. He read it again, slower this time, as if hoping the letters would rearrange into something kinder. They didn't. What is this? He whispered, voice shaking. A file, I said, from a source I trust. I think you need to see it. He pushed back from the table, running a hand through his hair. That's not. She wouldn't. This isn't. I stayed silent, letting the words work their way through him. His face paled further, a sheen of fear slipping across it. Not fear of consequences, fear of truth. I know Sierra has been under pressure, he said quickly. I know she makes strong decisions, but this makes it sound like his voice broke. Like she never planned for me to be part of any of it. I spoke softly. Nolan, there are things happening around you that you deserve to understand. And you won't find answers by defending someone who won't defend you. He sank back into his chair, his body folding in on itself. I thought she was helping us, he whispered. I thought she believed in me. My heart ached, not with anger, but with something older. Motherhood, grief, memory all layered together. I reached across the table, resting my hand over his. I know you did. He held my hand for a moment before pulling away, covering his face with both palms. His shoulders shook once, twice, before he steadied himself. When he finally lifted his head, there was a hollow ache in his eyes, but also something new, awareness. "What do I do?" he asked. "Start by listening," I said gently. "Start by asking questions, quiet ones, and watch how she answers them. The truth will show itself." He nodded slowly, wiping his face with the back of his hand. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I can do that." A moment later, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and the color drained from his face. "It's him." I didn't need to ask who. I simply nodded. "Answer," calmly. He stepped into the hallway, voice trembling at first before rising into a tone meant to hide fear. I listened only to the cadence, not the words, hearing panic lace through every syllable. When the call ended, he returned with a look of shock. "He wants me to meet him," Nolan said. "Today." "We don't move fast," I reminded him. "We move smart." He stared at me, breath uneven. "Mom, what if I'm already in too deep?" "You're not," I said quietly. "You're standing on the edge, and you can still step back." He closed his eyes again, nodding slowly. "I'll try." "Not try," I corrected softly. "Choose." He looked at me then, really looked. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. Something cracked open, not broken, but awakened. "I'll choose," he whispered. I stood, brushed his arm gently, and walked toward the hallway. Behind me, I heard him exhale shakily, the sound of a man starting to confront the life he had allowed himself to slip into. He wasn't ready yet, but he was moving. And sometimes the first step toward the truth is simply allowing yourself to feel the ground beneath you. Tomorrow, he would begin to see everything clearly. And soon, he would learn just how deep Sierra's betrayal went. Evening settled slowly over the house, stretching the shadows across the living room until they touched the hallway like silent fingers. I waited for that softness, that muted quiet that comes only when a home is pretending to rest. Nolan had stepped out an hour earlier, saying he needed air, though we both knew he needed space to process the truth pressing against him. Sierra had left shortly before him, her footsteps sharp, her perfume lingering behind like a warning. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, I was alone. I didn't turn on a single light. The darkness wasn't frightening. It was steady, honest. It hid nothing from me. Standing inside it felt like stepping into a place where I could breathe without pretending. I moved slowly to the living room, sat down on the old couch, and rested my hands on my knees. The soft ticking of the clock on the wall sounded louder than usual, counting down the moments until my son would walk through the door and face a truth he could no longer run from. The flash drive lay in my palm, warm from the heat of my skin. I turned it over with my thumb, feeling its small ridges, remembering the cold wood of the cabin desk where I first discovered it. I had listened to the recordings twice now, every word etched into me like cracks through glass. The conversations, the documents, the planned steps, it all pointed to one thing. They were never going to let me keep anything. Not the cabin, not the savings, not even the small comforts I had tucked away for old age. And worse, they were never going to let Nolan keep himself. A faint sound drifted through the air, the gravel shifting under the weight of a car tire. I inhaled slowly. The front door opened a moment later, followed by the soft click of the lock being turned. Footsteps entered the house, hesitant, careful, as if the person walking inside already sensed the darkness was not accidental. "Mom?" Nolan's voice wavered. "Why is it so dark in here?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence settle around him, let him step forward, searching for me with eyes slowly adjusting to the absence of light. His footsteps creaked across the floor until he was close enough to see my outline on the couch. "Mom?" he repeated. I lifted my head slightly. "Close the door," I said softly. He obeyed, confusion pulling at his expression. The faint light from outside disappeared, and the room fell into complete stillness. He walked toward me slowly, stopping a few feet away, his breathing tight. "What's going on?" he asked. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" I held the flash drive gently between my fingers. "I was waiting for you." He swallowed. "Why?" I motioned for him to sit. He lowered himself onto the chair across from me, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tightly together. The darkness made him look younger somehow, as if the years had peeled back to reveal the boy he once was, unsure, hopeful, easily steered by the wrong hands. I took a breath, slow and steady. "Because I know everything, sweetheart." The words landed softly, but the effect was sharp. Nolan's shoulders stiffened. His breath caught in his throat. "Everything? About what?" "About what you've been doing." My voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It simply existed in the space between us, firm and undeniable. "I know about the transfers. I know about the authorization you used without asking me. I know about the cabin. And," I added, holding up the flash drive, "I know about the people you've been listening to." His face went pale, almost gray in the dimness. He shook his head, quickly at first, then slower, the denial faltering. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't—" "Nolan," I said gently, "don't lie to me in the dark." His breath hitched. His shoulders slumped. And finally, for the first time since all this began, he let himself sit in the truth. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he whispered. "I swear." I leaned forward slightly. "Then tell me what you did mean to happen." He closed his eyes, covering his face with both hands. In the silence that followed, the clock ticked loudly, relentless and patient. When he finally spoke again, his voice was cracked. "I was scared," he said. "I didn't know how to get out of the mess I was in. I owed money. I made mistakes. And Sierra, she kept telling me this was temporary, that we were just borrowing until things settled. She told me you'd never notice, that it was harmless." Harmless. The word stung more than anger ever could. "And you believed her?" I said quietly. He nodded miserably. "I wanted to. I needed something to believe in." I let his confession settle for a moment, then opened my hand and showed him the flash drive. "I found this at the cabin," I said. "It has everything on it. Plans, documents, recordings. They weren't helping you, Nolan. They were using you, and they planned to discard you the moment you became inconvenient." His head shot up. "What do you mean?" I didn't soften the truth. "They talked about you like you were a tool, not a partner, not even a person, just someone who would sign what they needed until they didn't need you anymore." His breathing sharpened, panic rising. "That can't be true. She wouldn't." "She would," I said. "She already has." He stared at the drive with wide, shaking eyes. "I didn't know. I didn't know any of this. I thought I was helping. I thought she cared." I reached out, placing the drive gently on the table between us. "You have a choice now," I said. "You can continue down this path, or you can step away from it. But you can't pretend anymore." Tears spilled down his cheeks, unexpected and silent. He lowered his head, shoulders trembling. "Mom," he choked. "I messed everything up. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to be this person. I let him cry, not because I wasn't angry, I was, but because this was the first moment I had seen him become honest with himself. When his breathing steadied, I spoke softly, firmly. You can still fix this. How? He whispered. You help me, I said. You stop protecting people who are destroying you. You tell me everything. And from this moment on, you choose a different road. He lifted his eyes to mine. For the first time, they held something close to clarity. I'll help you, he said quietly. I don't want to lose you. Not like this. You won't, I replied. Not if you stand beside me now. He nodded slowly, wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket. What do you need me to do? I leaned back, letting the darkness settle around us like a quiet agreement. We start by telling the truth, I said. All of it. To the right people. He swallowed hard, but he didn't look away. I'm with you, he whispered. For the first time since this nightmare began, I believed him. The next morning arrived with a strange calm, the kind that wraps itself around a house before anyone has spoken a single word. Nolan hadn't slept much, but at least he hadn't disappeared into the night the way I feared he might. He sat at the kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, staring into the dark swirl as if it held answers he had lost long ago. His eyes were still swollen from the night before, but there was a steadiness there that hadn't existed until now. We don't have much time, I said gently as I placed a folder on the table between us. He nodded, his jaw set. I'm ready. Those 3 words were small, quiet, but they carried more weight than anything he had told me in years. I sat beside him and opened the folder. Inside were the printed pages Calvin had compiled, the notes Vivian had prepared, and the evidence I had gathered from the flash drive. Together, they formed a map of something dark and calculated, something that had wrapped itself around my son like a vine pulling him toward the ground. I talked to Vivian first thing this morning, I said. She and a detective team will be waiting near the Hillside office. They'll come in as soon as we give the signal. Nolan swallowed hard. You think he'll be there? The man behind all this? Yes, I said. He expects you, and Sierra will be there too. They think they still control you. He nodded. Again, the truth of that making his hands shake slightly. And when they see I'm not playing along, that's when everything breaks open. He took a shaky breath, then looked at me with a seriousness I had not seen in him since he was a child trying to explain a broken window. Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. I placed my hand over his. You're my son. I won't ever step away from you. But today, you have to stand with me. Not behind me. With me. His fingers tightened around mine. I will. We left the house quietly, not wanting to wake Sierra. Nolan didn't say a word as he locked the door behind us. There was a heaviness in the air that made everything feel suspended, as if the world itself sensed what was coming. We drove together in my car, the road stretching ahead like a line we could not turn back from. The Hillside Partners office sat in a small commercial plaza on the outskirts of town. It wasn't grand or impressive. It was forgettable, like a place designed to exist only long enough to serve its purpose before disappearing. The blinds were drawn. The parking lot was almost empty. Only 2 cars sat near the back. One I recognized as Sierra's, the other unfamiliar but expensive looking. Nolan exhaled shakily. He's here. Yes, I said. And you're not alone. Across the lot, near the coffee shop, I saw Vivian leaning against her car, pretending to scroll on her phone. Two plainclothes detectives sat inside a vehicle parked a short distance away. They didn't acknowledge us, but their presence settled something in my chest. "Ready?" I asked. "No," he whispered, "but I'm going anyway." We stepped inside the hillside office. The air was stale, heavy with the faint scent of paper and something metallic. Sierra stood near the desk, flipping through a stack of folders. When she saw us, she forced a bright smile, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of irritation. "There you two are," she said. "We need to move quickly today. Damien doesn't have all morning." She motioned us toward the back office. Nolan hesitated, and I felt him gather his breath. "Sierra," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Her smile faltered. "About what?" "About everything." Before she could respond, the back door opened, and the man I recognized from the audio recordings stepped out. Damien Kessler. His presence filled the room with something cold. His eyes swept over me with dismissive interest, then settled on Nolan with the kind of gaze a predator uses to judge whether prey is still worth the effort. "You're late," he said flatly. Nolan didn't flinch. "We're not here to sign anything." Damien's gaze sharpened. "Excuse me?" I stepped forward, my voice steady. "You used my son. Both of you did. And it ends today." For a moment, silence gripped the room so tightly I could almost hear the tension crack. Sierra's face went pale. She took a step back. Damien's expression did not break. It hardened, compressing into something sharp and dangerous. "You've been listening to someone," he said, his voice lowering. "And I doubt it's your wife." "I've been listening to the truth," Nolan replied, surprising even himself with the steadiness in his tone. Sierra stepped forward, her voice rising. "Nolan, think about what you're doing. They will pin everything on you. You think helping her will save you? You're already in this. You're responsible for—" "No," he said firmly. "You made me responsible. You told me we were helping ourselves. You told me nothing would hurt my mother. All lies." She opened her mouth again, but Damien's hand shot out, stopping her. His eyes locked onto Nolan with a cold finality. "You're making a mistake." "No," Nolan said, meeting his gaze. "I'm fixing one." I stepped forward and placed the flash drive on the desk between them. "Everything you've done," I said, "is here." Damien glanced down at it, then up at me. A slow, cruel smile touched the corner of his mouth. "You think anyone will believe an old woman and a panicked son?" Before I could respond, a knock came at the door. 3 sharp taps that filled the room with sudden tension. "Mr. Kessler?" a voice called. "Detective Vasquez, we need to have a word." Sierra gasped. Damien's face tightened. Nolan exhaled with a shudder that sounded like relief and fear tangled together. The detectives entered the office calmly, flash of a badge. Clear instructions, no room for escape. Vivian followed behind them, eyes sharp, expression unreadable. "Damien Kessler," the lead detective said. "We have several questions regarding financial activity connected to this office. Please step away from the desk." Sierra reached for Damien as if he could shield her, but he stepped aside, leaving her exposed. The betrayal was instant, visible, brutal. She stared at him, mouth open, eyes wide with shock. "You told me." "I told you what you needed to hear," he said coldly. The click of handcuffs cut through the room. Damien finally looked away from us. His expression hardened into something empty. Sierra stumbled backward, her voice cracking as the detectives approached her. "No," she whispered. "No, this wasn't supposed to happen." Nolan turned away, hand covering his face, the sound of her voice unraveling him. I placed a hand on his back, steadying him. "It's over," I said softly. "You're free now." He nodded, shoulders shaking, but he didn't collapse. He didn't hide. He stood there, facing the ruin of the choices he had once believed were his only way out. Vivian stepped beside me. "You did exactly what you needed to do," she whispered. Nolan looked at me with tears filling his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "We'll face the rest together," I said. "But this part ends now." And as the officers led the two people who had nearly dismantled our lives out the door, I felt a deep, grounded breath settle inside me. Justice had finally walked into the room. The drive back from the hillside office felt unreal, as if the world had shifted half an inch to the left, and nothing fit quite the way it used to. Nolan sat in the passenger seat, his face turned toward the window, the distant afternoon light softening the exhaustion etched into his features. He hadn't said much since the detectives placed Damien and Sierra into separate vehicles. He didn't need to. The silence between us was full of fear, relief, guilt, and something fragile but growing. Something like hope. When we reached home, he hesitated before stepping out of the car, gripping the door handle like he needed the world to stop spinning for one more second. I waited. I had spent years learning that silence often said more than words ever could. Finally, he whispered, "I don't know what happens next." "We take the next step," I said gently. "Nothing more, nothing less." He nodded, though uncertainty flickered in his eyes. We walked inside together. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if something heavy had been carried out of it. I set my purse on the table and reached for the kettle. Nolan sat down at the kitchen table, shoulders dropping with fatigue. "Do you want tea?" I asked. He nodded silently. When I placed the mug in front of him, his fingers wrapped around it as though the warmth might hold him together. "Mom," he said softly, "what if I'm charged? What if everything I did, even if I didn't understand, comes back to bury me?" "You're cooperating," I said. "You're taking responsibility. That matters." "But is it enough?" His voice cracked in the middle, and I saw the boy he used to be flash beneath the man sitting in front of me. I didn't stop it. I should have. Why didn't I? I sat across from him, folding my hands and meeting his eyes. "Because you were lost. Because you trusted the wrong person. And because you were afraid. You aren't the first person to fall into someone else's shadow." He blinked hard, tears gathering. "I almost ruined everything you had." "You didn't ruin me," I said. "You misled yourself, and now you're correcting that." He swallowed, voice trembling. "I want to fix it. I really do." "You already started," I said. Before he could reply, a knock sounded at the front door, firm, authoritative. Nolan stiffened. I touched his hand lightly, then went to open it. Two detectives stood on the porch, the same pair from earlier. One held a clipboard, the other a narrow envelope. "Mrs. Hawthorne," the taller one said, "we wanted to update you on the situation." I stepped aside, letting them enter. Nolan straightened in his chair, trying to look composed despite his raw exhaustion. "We've begun processing everything that was found at Hillside," the shorter detective said. "And your evidence," he nodded toward me, "is already proving critical." "Is Sierra cooperating?" Nolan asked quietly. "She's talking," the detective replied. "Not honestly yet, but pressure tends to change things." "And Damien?" I asked. The taller detective let out a breath. "Tight-lipped, but the files recovered from your cabin paint a picture he's going to have trouble escaping." I nodded slowly. "Good." The detective turned toward Nolan. As for you, we'll need a full statement. Your cooperation today helped significantly, but you may face some consequences depending on how deeply you were involved and what you can confirm about the scheme." Nolan's voice wavered. "I'll tell the truth. All of it." "That's the right decision," the detective said. "And it will be taken into account." They handed me the envelope. "Your name is central in the case," he continued. "You'll be contacted for depositions and interviews. You're also entitled to updates on the broader investigation. There's more here than just your situation. The network stretches further than we expected." A chill moved through me. "How far?" "3 states so far," he said. "Multiple victims. We're contacting them as we piece everything together." 3 states. Not just my son. Not just me. A web wide enough to swallow people who never saw it coming. After the detectives left, Nolan sank back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know it was that big." "I know," I said softly. "And now they know too." We spent the next 2 hours at the kitchen table, going through paperwork, timelines, and notes. Nolan answered every question as best he could. Sometimes his voice cracked. Sometimes he had to pause and breathe. But he didn't run from any of it. Later, when Vivian arrived, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've done more than most people manage in these situations," she said. "You step forward. That matters." "Will they arrest me?" he asked. "Not today," she said gently. "You're cooperating fully. That gives you a place to stand." He nodded, though the fear didn't fully leave his eyes. Vivian turned to me. Damien's arrest created a domino effect. His records, emails, and offshore accounts tied directly to the shell companies. Sierra's confession, partial as it is, supports that. What you found at the cabin confirmed it. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Legal proceedings," she said. "Hearings, charges, court dates. But this part is law enforcement's burden now, not yours." My shoulders loosened. A breath I hadn't known I'd been holding left my body slowly. "And Nolan?" I asked. She gave him a long, thoughtful look. "Restitution is likely. Community service, possibly. Oversight. Maybe probation. But prison is unlikely if he continues to cooperate." He exhaled shakily, relief and guilt colliding in his expression. After Vivian left, the house grew quiet again. Nolan sat beside me on the couch, exhausted in a way that reached down to the bones. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said softly. "You're right," I replied. "Forgiveness isn't deserved. It's given, and it's not given all at once." He nodded slowly. "So, what now?" "Now," I said, "we rebuild, slowly, honestly, and we let the truth finish its work." He leaned back, eyes closing, a long breath leaving his chest. We sat together in the fading light, not mother and son caught in a storm, but 2 people who had chosen to face the wreckage rather than hide from it. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain. A storm was coming, but it wasn't the dangerous kind. It was the kind that washes things clean. The day after the arrests arrived quietly, wrapped in the kind of gray mourning that makes the world feel softer than it really is. I woke before the sun, not because fear tugged me from sleep, but because something inside me felt unsettled, as if the air itself knew a moment I'd been avoiding was finally approaching. Nolan was sleeping in the guest room, the same room where he used to curl up after nightmares when he was little. I could hear his slow breaths through the thin wall, uneven at first, then settling into a tired rhythm. He had earned that sleep, He had earned the chance to breathe without lies pressing against his ribs. I moved into the kitchen, letting the kettle warm slowly on the stove. The whistle rose softly, and I poured myself a cup of tea, holding it in both hands. The warmth anchored me. Today, I knew, was not about legal steps or financial recovery. Today was about something deeper, something no court could force, no detective could script. Today was about the wound between a mother and a son, and whether it could heal. When Nolan entered the kitchen, he looked older than he did yesterday, not physically, but in the quiet behind his eyes. He sat down with a slow exhale, running a hand through his hair as if he'd done it hundreds of times already this morning. "Morning," he whispered. "Good morning," I replied. He stared at his hands for a long moment before speaking again. "Mom, can we talk?" I nodded once. "Of course." But he didn't start right away. He swallowed, blinked a few times, then pressed his palms flat against the table as though steadying himself. "I didn't know how much would hurt until it was too late," he said softly. "I didn't know how wrong everything was until I saw the fear in your eyes last night." "You saw more than fear," I said gently. He nodded. "I saw disappointment, and I put it there." I lowered my gaze. "You did." He inhaled, shakily. "I've been thinking about how to explain myself. I thought maybe I could tell you about the debts, the job I lost, the promises Sierra made. But every version I tried felt like an excuse. And excuses aren't what you need from me." "No," I said. "They aren't." His voice cracked. "I'm sorry." The words dropped into the air like something heavy and fragile. He didn't whisper them. He didn't hide them. He let them sit there, open and bare. But apologies, real ones, are more than a sentence. They come from places people don't like to visit. And I could see he was still searching through those dark corners. So I waited. He took a breath that trembled all the way through him. "When Dad died, I thought I would step up. I thought I would protect you. But I didn't. I fell apart and pretended I wasn't falling. And every time you looked at me with trust, it made me feel smaller because I knew I hadn't earned it." He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. "Sierra saw that. She knew how to talk to me. She knew what to say, so I felt bigger, stronger, smarter. She made me feel like I was finally enough, and I let that feeling blind me. I let her guide me instead of listening to the part of myself that knew better." He paused, chest rising and falling with painful honesty. "I didn't just disappoint you, Mom. I betrayed you. Not because I wanted to, but because I was afraid to admit how far I'd fallen." I listened to every word, letting them settle like stones placed carefully beside each other. When he finally fell quiet, I reached under the table and pulled out the wooden box he had carved as a boy. The box he and Sierra had touched without understanding its meaning. I placed it gently between us. Nolan's eyes widened, and he reached for it slowly, as though touching something sacred. "I remember making this," he whispered. "I was 8. I had a blister on my thumb from sanding it." "And you refused to stop until it was smooth," I said. "You said the box had to be worthy of what went inside." He traced the grooves of the carving with trembling fingers. "You kept it all these years." "Of course." His jaw tightened, and tears filled his eyes again. "I forgot who I was," he said. "But you didn't." I opened the box slowly. Inside were small pieces of our life. An old movie ticket, a seashell he found on a beach trip with Henry, a note he had written in messy pencil handwriting. "Mom, don't be sad. I'll take care of you when I'm big." Nolan covered his mouth with his hand, sobbing softly. "I promised you," he choked. and I broke every part of it. You're here now, I said softly, and that matters more than you think. He shook his head. I don't deserve forgiveness. You're right, I said gently. Forgiveness isn't something people deserve. It's something they grow into. He looked up at me, confused. I continued. You're taking responsibility. You're helping the investigation. You're choosing truth instead of hiding behind fear. That's the beginning of earning trust again. Forgiveness isn't a door that opens all at once. It's a path, one you walk slowly, with clean hands. He nodded, swallowing hard. I'm ready to walk it. We sat there for a long moment, quiet together, the wooden box between us glowing faintly in the morning light. Something inside me loosened, something tight, something wounded, not healed yet, but softened enough to breathe. I want to help fix some of the damage, Nolan said. Whatever comes legally, I'll face it, but I want to start making things right. You will, I said, one step at a time. He touched the wooden box again, his fingers lingering over the note inside. I want to be the son you believed I was. I want you to be the man you almost became, I said softly. And now you have a chance. He reached across the table, hesitating for only a second before taking my hand. His grip was gentle but sure. Not a plea, not a defense, a promise. I'm sorry, he whispered again, voice breaking. I'm so sorry, Mom. I squeezed his hand. I hear you, and I believe you. That's the first step. Slowly, he leaned forward, resting his forehead against my shoulder. I placed a hand on his back, feeling the trembling breaths of a man trying to rebuild from rubble. We stayed like that for a long time, mother and son, wounded but still connected, learning how to stand in the space where pain meets healing. Outside, the sky began to clear, letting a strip of light stretch across the kitchen floor. It touched the wooden box first, warming the carved letters, almost as if reminding us both that some things can be broken, shaken, nearly lost, and still find their way back to the light. The weeks that followed moved in a rhythm I hadn't known in years, slow but steady, quiet but full. Not the suffocating quiet of secrets, but the gentle kind that comes after a storm has passed, and the world is finally taking a breath again. Nolan and I fell into a new routine, one shaped by honesty and small acts of rebuilding. He met with detectives regularly, answered every question, signed every statement, and each time he came home, he looked a little lighter, a little more like the boy I had raised and the man he still had the chance to become. But healing doesn't end with survival. It calls for purpose. It asks us to turn pain into something that matters. The idea arrived one morning while I was folding laundry. Such an ordinary task that it almost surprised me when clarity rose through it. The cabin, that place had been meant to be a haven, a promise Henry and I made to build a refuge for the future. It had become the battlefield for someone else's scheme. And yet, in the end, it had also been the place where truth had waited patiently for me to discover it. Perhaps its purpose wasn't lost. Perhaps it was simply changing. I called Calvin first. He answered on the second ring. "You're up early," he said, his voice warm with that quiet steadiness he always carried. "I've been thinking," I replied, "and I want to discuss an idea with you." By noon, he was sitting at my dining table with his reading glasses perched low on his nose, studying the plans I'd scribbled onto a notepad. "You want to sell the cabin," he said, "and use the proceeds to start something new." "Yes," I said, "something that helps people like me, people who've been targeted, not just for their money, but for their loneliness, their trust, their vulnerability. He leaned back, crossing his arms. A foundation. A place where older adults can go for advice, I said. For protection, for legal guidance. A place that teaches them what signs to watch for. A place that makes sure they're not alone. Calvin's eyes softened. You want to take what hurt you and turn it into something that protects others. I nodded. I don't want my story to end with what was taken. I want it to end with what I built. He took off his glasses, cleaning them slowly with the edge of his shirt. I'll help you, he said. But you need a lawyer who understands nonprofit work, someone who can set this up correctly from the start. I know, I said with a small smile. That's why Vivian is coming for lunch. As if on cue, the doorbell rang. Nolan answered it, and Vivian stepped inside holding a stack of folders and the calm authority of someone who could navigate the legal world with precision and grace. When she heard the idea, she didn't hesitate. It's ambitious, she said, but completely possible. And more importantly, it's needed. We spent hours at the table outlining the foundation structure, what clients it would serve, what protections it would offer, what resources it would need. Nolan listened quietly at first, then began offering ideas of his own. When he suggested creating an outreach program for people who didn't have family nearby, I saw pride flicker in his eyes, an emotion he hadn't worn in years. By the end of the meeting, a name emerged, almost naturally. Silver Shield, I said softly. It feels right, Calvin smiled. A shield made of experience, not metal. A shield made of survival, Vivian added. Nolan nodded. A shield made of stories like ours. And so Silver Shield Foundation was born, not as a monument to loss, but as a testament to resilience. The next few weeks moved quickly. The cabin sold for more than I expected, and I watched the papers slide across the attorney's desk with a strange mix of grief and relief. Henry had loved that place, but I believed he would have understood. Futures change, purposes evolve, and safety, in its truest form, is sometimes found in letting go. With the proceeds, we secured a small office space in town, a bright, modest building with wide windows and a front door that chimed softly when opened. Nolan painted the hallway himself, choosing a gentle shade of blue. Calvin set up the bookkeeping software. Vivian trained a small volunteer team on intake procedures. People began showing up before we even officially opened. A woman in her 70s whose nephew had taken control of her credit card. A man who suspected his neighbor of manipulating him into signing away a portion of his land. A quiet couple unsure how to protect their savings after a series of unusual phone calls. They came with stories, some painful, some enraging, all familiar in ways that echoed through me. And for each one, we listened. We guided. We stood by them where others had stepped away. One afternoon, as we wrapped up our first day of full operations, Nolan approached me holding a worn binder filled with brochures and intake forms. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want to volunteer here. More than just paperwork. I want to help people directly." I looked up from the desk. "You already are. I mean, really help." His voice steadied. "I know what it feels like to be pulled into something I didn't understand. And I know what it feels like to hurt someone I love. If I can keep even one person from making the mistakes I made, I want to do that." Emotion gathered in my chest, warm and full. "Then stay," I said. "Stay and help me build this." He smiled, a real smile, one that softened the lines on his face and made him look years younger. "I'd like that." Calvin stepped into the room just then, holding a stack of financial reports. "You two did something today," he said. "Something good." Vivian joined him, arms crossed, a small smirk on her lips. "And something rare," she added, "turning pain into protection." I looked around the room, at the newly painted walls, at the quiet hum of the computer, at the intake forms waiting on the desk, and I felt something settle deep inside me. Not closure, not finality, but purpose. Silver Shield wasn't just an office, it was a promise. To myself, to Nolan, to Henry, and to every person who had been told their trust made them weak. As we turned off the lights and stepped outside, the street lamp flickered on, casting a soft glow across the parking lot. The air was cool, the sky clear, and I felt the first true peace I'd known in months. "We did good today," Nolan said beside me. "Yes," I replied. "And tomorrow, we'll do more." We walked toward the car together, not as mother and son fractured by betrayal, but as partners, two people building something stronger than what had nearly destroyed us. And for the first time since the nightmare began, I felt the shape of my life expanding again, not shrinking. The world wasn't ending, it was opening. The morning of the final hearing arrived soft and pale, the sky washed in a gentle gold that made everything look calmer than it felt. Nolan and I drove to the cabin one last time, not because we needed to sign anything or gather more documents, but because I felt a pull toward the place where the truth had finally stepped into the light. The road curled through the pines the way it always had, familiar and steady, carrying memories in every turn. Nolan sat beside me, quiet, thoughtful, his hands relaxed for the first time in months. When we reached the hill overlooking the cabin, he let out a long breath. "It looks smaller," he said softly. "It looks like home," I replied. We stepped out of the car and walked slowly toward the porch. The boards creaked under our weight, the same way they had creaked under mine the day I found the flash drive that changed everything. I unlocked the door, and the scent of cedar drifted out, warm and earthy. The cabin no longer felt like a battleground in someone else's plan. It felt like a chapter, important, painful, but complete. Inside, a few boxes sat neatly stacked in the corner. I had packed them earlier in the week. Old photos, letters, blankets Henry and I used during winter evenings. The rest of the furniture would go to a charitable resale store tomorrow. Standing in the middle of the room, Nolan turned slowly, taking everything in. "I grew up here," he whispered. "You did," I said. "And the best parts of you still live here." He looked down. "I almost let this place slip away." "You didn't," I replied gently. "That's what matters." We sat on the old couch together, the fabric worn in the places where Henry used to rest his arm. I opened my purse and pulled out the small wooden box, his wooden box, and placed it on the coffee table. Nolan watched it like someone watching a memory come back to life. "Before we leave," I said, "I want to put something inside." I opened the lid and placed the small key from the safe where I had stored the flash drive after the investigation concluded. It was symbolic now, nothing more. The flash drive itself had already been logged into evidence, copied, and sealed in a courtroom file. But this key represented something deeper, what was unlocked, what was revealed, and what had been mended in the aftermath. Nolan brushed his fingers across the lid. "You're sure you want to leave it here?" "Yes," I said. "The box belongs to the past, and we are finally stepping into the future." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Mom?" "Yes?" "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't heard me that day, in the garage?" I looked at him carefully. "I think about it more often than you know, but then I remember something. What's that? That even if I hadn't heard you, the truth would have found its way to me. It always does. He exhaled, his shoulders loosening. I'm still scared. Sometimes. So am I admitted. Fear doesn't disappear. It just stops steering. He gave a soft smile. We sat there for a long moment, letting the quiet fill the spaces between us. Finally, he stood and looked around the room one last time. I'm ready, he said. So am I. We closed the door gently behind us. I turned the lock one final time, but instead of the ache I expected, a calm settled inside my chest. The cabin had held my past. Now it would help build the future. Through the foundation, through the people we would help, through the work that had only just begun. We drove back toward town, the sky brightening above us. When we arrived at the Silver Shield office, the parking lot was already half full. Clients waiting for guidance, volunteers preparing paperwork, Calvin standing near the entrance with a clipboard tucked under his arm, Vivian reviewing files beside the reception desk, life moving forward in small, powerful ways. As soon as we stepped inside, Calvin greeted us with a smile. You two look lighter, he said. We left something behind, I replied. Something that needed to stay in the past. Vivian joined us, handing Nolan a set of documents. Your cooperation agreement came through this morning. Everything you did, the statements, the meetings, the evidence you confirmed, worked in your favor. You'll have conditions to follow, but nothing that takes you away from your life. Nolan let out a breath he had been holding for weeks. Thank you, he whispered. Vivian nodded. You earned this outcome. Calvin placed a hand on Nolan's shoulder. And now you get to focus on building something better. A few clients walked through the door then, a widow clutching a folder of papers, a man confused about a notice he'd received, a woman seeking help for her elderly aunt. Nolan looked at them, then at me, and something shifted inside him. He stepped forward, straightening his posture, ready to greet them. Can I help you? He asked one of them gently, watching him in that moment, steady, compassionate, present, felt like watching a wound close. Not suddenly, not completely, but enough to trust that healing was no longer just a possibility. It was happening. I stepped into my small office at the back and looked around at the framed mission statement on the wall. Simple words, powerful meaning, a promise we were now responsible for. A soft knock came at the door. Nolan stepped inside, holding a small envelope. This came for you, he said. I opened it carefully. Inside was a simple letter from one of the detectives. It confirmed that the case, as it related to me, was officially closed. My savings were restored, my name cleared, my rights protected, and the network Damien had built was being dismantled piece by piece. I folded the letter and set it on my desk. It's over, Nolan said quietly. Not over, I corrected gently. Just beginning. He smiled softly. I liked the sound of that. We stepped back out into the main room, where voices blended together, people seeking guidance, volunteers explaining forms, the soft shuffle of papers and steps. It sounded like life. It sounded like purpose. Later that afternoon, after the last client left and the volunteers packed up, Nolan approached me again, holding a small notebook. What's this? I asked Asid. A new savings book, he said. I opened it in your name this morning, with my own money. It's not much yet, but I want to contribute, to rebuild what I helped damage. Emotion rose in my chest, warm and overwhelming. I took the book from him gently. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded, his eyes bright. I want you to feel safe again." I touched his cheek the way I used to when he was small. "I do," I said. "More than you know." We locked up the office together, stepping into the cool evening air. The sky was streaked with soft orange clouds, and the breeze carried the scent of the coming night. Nolan walked beside me as we headed toward the car. "Mom?" he said softly. "Yes?" "You stayed, even when you had every reason to walk away." I took a slow breath, feeling the truth of that. "I stayed," I said, "because you're my son, and because staying is sometimes the bravest thing a person can do." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I want to be someone worth staying for." "You're getting there," I replied, "step by step." We reached the car, and I paused for a moment, looking up at the sky. "I was told to disappear," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "But I stayed, and that made all the difference." Nolan opened the passenger door, glancing at me with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper: respect. We drove home together, the quiet between us no longer heavy with fear, but full of something new. Something like peace. Something like beginning again. And as the streetlights guided us forward, I knew with complete certainty it was never too late.